Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to the podcast, folks. The Evil Dungeon Master Universe podcast. I am your host, the Evil Dungeon Master Vince, and hopefully you're having a great day. It is Friday. Finally, the end of the week for most people, and hopefully it is your Friday as well. If it's not, then your Friday will be around very soon. To start things off, I just want to say thank you again for showing up and listening to the podcast. Showing up, I don't know, I can't see you, but you know what I mean. Thank you for downloading the podcast. Thank you for listening on YouTube. I appreciate every comment and every like that I get. Uh, the podcast does a little bit better on Spotify, but some people, again, wanted it on YouTube, so I figured, why not? Head over to theevildm.com and you can find out everything about me and all my projects, as well as how to contact me. But ask the DM at theevildm.com is the easiest way to get a hold of me, or facebook.com/theevildungeonmaster. Anyway, on to today's topic, and it's about a book that got me through getting back into solo role-playing. Now, solo role-playing, again, I did originally get the original Mythic Game Master emulator way back when it first was the Red Book, and came out in 2000, I don't know, 6 or whatever, the Red Book. And I really wasn't sure how it came. I got it around 2010, but I wasn't really sure how it worked. And then when the blue one came out a little bit later, I think that was 2012, just a Game Master emulator itself, I still wasn't sure. And I didn't really know how to do it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Solo roleplay is not very easy sometimes because you basically have to talk to yourself or imagine yourself or wear two different hats. And then I tried again in 2016. No. Finally, it clicked in during COVID because, COVID, you really, don't have a lot to do during that lockdown that we had that was pointless. And yeah, sure, I could put my group online, Discord once a week or whatever, twice a month, however we did it. But there wasn't a lot to do because you could sit at home, watch TV, and if you wanted to go out, you had to wear a stupid mask, and you weren't allowed out half the time, and I hate wearing masks, so I stayed in a lot. One book that I picked up, and I never really read it until COVID, it was Top 10 Games You Can Play in Your Head and by Yourself. Now, there's a bunch of little mini games that you could play in here with some dice. Some of them probably won't even play at all. I've gone through them all a couple times just to, see what they did. They're little goofy things that you could play in a matter of maybe 5 to 30 minutes. You can expand upon it. But the one thing in here that really clicked in my head is they had a simple exercise on page 6. And it talks about you being, you playing this game as the player and the shadow self, but representing a game master, so to speak. I guess they didn't use that term, but they called it the shadow self. And you're at a sanctuary, and you have to go in and steal an item in there. So you and the shadow self both know what the sanctuary looks like and what it holds. You imagine it. You're in your head. You're imagining this. Now you and the shadow self, or you're the GM as well, know what it looks like, but you as yourself, who's the player, will need to forget what's going on because the GM part of you will take over. Now, it talks about the shadow self going inside the sanctuary and rearranging everything and putting the item that you were supposed to steal in a different area, aka you now have your GM hat on. And it tells you to leave the human self, or the player, outside while your shadow self, the GM, goes in and rearranges everything. And you're outside as the player waiting, and then once the shadow self GM is done, he comes out and he lets you, the player, or your human self, go in. And it tells you to imagine the sanctuary as you had seen before, but things in different places now. In other words, you're putting your player hat on and you're walking in and you're exploring. And this is the first time you've seen this room like this. So say you walked in, originally looked around, And there was a piano on the right hand side. There was a table on the left hand side. There was a, I don't know, display by the door. Now you walk in, and the piano is by the door. The display is towards the back. The table is, in the middle of the room this time. There's some statues have been moved around. It's all completely different. And this works for solo role playing because it really clicked in my head because you're using two hats. You have to try to, when you play games, don't metagame. This is kind of how the metagaming thing comes in. And you really need to put those two hats aside and just kind of play. And it talks about, you could talk to yourself and you can walk around the room and say, I touched this. And it started clicking in my head how solo role playing can actually work, for me at least. And since then, I've been using the Mythic Game Master emulator. I went and bought the second edition when it came out, which I wasn't too happy with. I like the original ones better. And then I got the Game Master Apprentice cards, which are fabulous as well. But it made me think of a time when I was a younger child, and a teenager for that matter too. But when I was a younger kid and I was playing with my Lego or GI Joe or whatever, or He Man at the time, and I would sit there and make up these little stories with, He Man or GI Joe, and we were going around, and I'd have the GI Joe set up, and then I have like the Cobras hiding in a certain place, and I had to see if the GI Joes recognize this, and had them walking through traps and stuff like that. He Man would be running around, just basically just punching everything because I don't know, I was a kid. But when I was a teenager, my buddy and I actually, when we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, we weren't allowed to, and like I've said in the past, we weren't really allowed to because Satanic Panic, we're going to become evil and devil worshippers and want to kill other people or ourselves because of playing Dungeons and Dragons, which never happened, so it's fine. So what we would do, instead of playing Dungeons and Dragons, we would play our own game because D6 dice were commonly found everywhere on board games at that time, card games, things like that. And when we got the D&D stuff taken away from us and we weren't allowed to play it, uh, and then our parents got my parents and his parents, our buddy's parents, got smart and wise because we were playing Twilight 2000 for a while, and they kind of caught on that it was like playing Dungeons and Dragons, so to speak. Not really, I don't know how, but they figured out that they would take that away from us too. And the solution that they thought was just take our dice away. Then we couldn't play. Wow, we're kids, we're inventive. So what we used to do is, because it was just the two of us, because we couldn't meet up with our other friends who were allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons, because they just kept finding out about us doing that. We would take 6-sided dice and we would run adventures with each other. Sometimes I would be a DM, he'd be a player. He'd be a DM and I'd be a player. And other times we would just sit there and both be players. So essentially we were doing co-op. And when it came time to figure out a situation where we couldn't, it had to be a GM arbitration or a random roll of the dice. We took our 6-sided dice, 2d6, and we had our little charts that we made up. Like, it was kind of just like, you find it or you don't find it, things like that. It was some simple things. It wasn't even a yes, no. It was like, you got it, and things like that. And what we did was we told stories and we rolled dice when we needed to. Or we fight the monster, we go into the cave, we pick up the magical item we were looking for, we go back to the mayor of the town, we hand the item over, we get our gold, and all we did was just sit on his front porch and we played these games together. And I remember those times that I did these things, and it just, when reading this book, it actually clicked all this into my mind and got me back into the groove of actually knowing and understanding how solo role playing worked itself. Now, do I sit down all the time and play it? No, not all the time. Do I sit down every once in a while? Yeah, I do. I can't write all that well. My writing is so bad because of all these years of hand cramps on the computer and things like that. Gave me carpal tunnel. My writing is horrible. So I mostly do it on my laptop here. that I record all these shows on. I will sit here in Obsidian Note and use the feature of that, and I will sit here and talk to myself and do voices if I really want to, just entertain myself. Sometimes I'm home and my wife is working, and she won't be back until late. Sometimes she works late, so I will sit here and instead of just watching TV like a bum, I will sit here and do my campaign, my solo campaign in AD&D, or sometimes I'll play a superhero game. There was one adventure that I was playing for uh, Unisystem Army of Darkness, the cinematic universe system. I was playing Ash versus Evil Dead, my own personal campaign, which I was thinking about putting on the channel because it's kind of fun. The whole premise of I picked it up after the series ended, and spoiler alert if you haven't watched it, don't listen for a second. I'm sure you've watched it by now. Obviously, the end of the show showed Ash in the future, so he disappeared after the big incident in the town, and he fought the big monster. They took him away and put him in whatever. The premise was that I was taking over from there, moving the plot forward, trying to figure out what happened to Ash as the world is plummeting into this apocalyptic world. And my character is coming into the town of, I think it was Dearborn, Michigan. I can't remember the name of the town. And I haven't played it in a little while, but it's a lot of fun. But I'll sit there and I'll talk to myself. I walk into the town, I look around. Do I find this? Look at the Game Master emulator. So all these things you can ask. And there's nothing wrong with sitting there and talking to yourself and asking questions out loud and saying what your character does out loud. Well, he goes inside the bar, he sits down, and he orders a drink. I look around the bar. Do I see anything unusual? Well, it's a bar and it's at night. And you probably will see something unusual at the bar, so likely. Roll percentile on the Mythic emulator? Yes. Well, what do I see? Well, then I could just do some action descriptors and just work from there and see how it rolls. It's a matter of just sitting there and interpreting things and making things up in your head. I know a lot of people have a problem with that because they're like, well, I need some direction. I need some type of way to do this or that, but just make it up. As long as you're having fun when playing, then there's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that's wrong with it is you not playing. That's really the only thing wrong. Well, I'm going to head out for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this show today. Pick up this book. It's not that much. I think it was like $5 or something. There's no price on it. Yeah, I'm looking at the back of the book. There's no price. It wasn't that expensive. It's something that you can use and you can play some of the games in here and they're a little bit of fun. So with that said, I'm going to head out, keep it original, keep it old school. And don't forget, no drama, no clickbait, all gaming.